Welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. These are the headlines. Diplomatic offensive for the Sudanese army chief al-Burhan, who's attending the UN General Assembly. Some say it might be a strategy to bolster his legitimacy. 4 memorials to the 1994 Rwanda genocide are now part of UNESCO's World Heritage List, a stern reminder of the mass killing in which 800,000 died in 100 days. Ghanaian engineers use artificial intelligence to tackle pests and diseases responsible for the destruction of a third of food destruction. The 78th session of the General Assembly is still on the way in New York. Among the attendees, Sudanese Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. This is his 7th foreign trip since the war broke out between the Sudanese Army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces in April. So what is he trying to achieve? Our regional correspondent Olivia Bizot spoke to Hassan Kaneje from the International Institute for Strategic Studies.
I think there is a desire on the side of General al-Burhan to get international recognition as well as legitimacy, especially since he's embroiled in a conflict with what was his former deputy, Hemedi. And so this is an attempt to get international legitimacy as well as recognition within the Sudanese theater and within the region.
So General al-Burhan has also recently visited countries including Turkey, Qatar and South Sudan. Why is he on this diplomatic overdrive?
It is critical that when you are under siege, especially considering the current conflict, that he first of all seeks to get the support of the neighbors. Remember, Egypt has been a big supporter of al-Burhan for years, and South Sudan is very familiar, of course, with al-Burhan, both when he was working within the military as well as when he was the head of state. And so doing the regional charm offensive is very important for him in trying to build a profile when it comes to negotiating, if there'll ever be negotiations, of course, with what he considers as the rebel movement.
Do you think these trips suggest that General al-Burhan is in a desperate situation, or is he just a man on a mission?
The current trips can be looked at in two ways. One is a sign of desperation because he's been unable to dislodge the militants and the rebel movements from the capital. But secondly, he's also on a mission to try and build a profile that's going to distinguish him from Hemedi, who, of course, is accused of many crimes, as well as having a very checkered history in the Janjaweed movement that, of course, is accused of many atrocities in Sudan.
And do you think there's a chance that the head of the Rapid Support Forces, Hemedi, could adopt a similar diplomatic strategy?
Of course, in response to the current maneuvers by al-Burhan, we're likely to see Hemedi start undertaking some kind of similar movements, starting, I think, on the continent and then the Middle East, where, of course, he has some supporters, as well as elsewhere. But to the extent that this is going to be impactful, I think it's going to depend to the success they're going to register in trying to bring allies on their side.
Thank you so much for being with us today on France 24.
During the UN gathering of world leaders, the MONUSCO was asked to leave the DRC at the end of this year. Democratic Republic of Congo President called for a speedier withdrawal of the UN force. Félix Tshisekedi said the mission had failed to bring peace in a country despite being there for about 25 years. Eastern DRC has faced decades of attacks from the many rebels that operate in the mineral-rich region. 4 memorials to the 1994 Rwanda genocide are now part of UNESCO's World Heritage List. The sites at Nyamata, Murambi, Gisozi and Bisesero commemorate the mass killings of a majority of Tutsi, but also moderate Hutus, between April and July 1994. Clément Di Roma has the story.
According to the United Nations and the Rwandan government, at least 1 million Tutsis were killed during the 1994 genocide. Several 100,000 bodies were discovered and buried in 250 memorials erected across the country. UNESCO has chosen to include 4 of them on the World Heritage List this week. One of them is in Kigali, where every distinguished guest of the authorities must visit the Gisozi site in the city center. It is uncommon to leave the land of 1,000 hills without setting foot on this site, where the remains of at least 250,000 people are laid to rest.
Being classified in the World Heritage is really meaningful for this point of fight against genocide ideology. It's also good for keeping alive the memory. We'll be partnering with UNESCO and work on different projects when it comes to memory preservation, when it comes to the archives, of course, the research, and also education program.
The Bisesero Memorial is also included on the UNESCO World Heritage List. It partly symbolizes, quote, the profound failure of the French troops during the massacres of Tutsis in the hills of the west of the country, according to the conclusions of historians' reports. Some associations still accuse the French army of complicity in genocide and of abandoning civilians during the Opération Turquoise in June 1994. A French court dismissed the case in September 2022. And to note, two other memorials in Nyamata and Murambi, where killings took place in schools and churches, are also entering the UNESCO list.
Roads between Niger and Benin are closed since the coup in Niger on July 26. Many people have turned to canoes and boats to cross the river Niger. Trucks blocked in Malanville at Benin's border are the most striking symbol of the fallout Niger's neighbors are suffering from sanctions imposed on Niamey. Laurent Berstecher tells the story.
At this closed border crossing between Niger and Benin, time has almost come to a standstill. Stranded here for weeks, these truck drivers seek refuge in the shade of their lorries and try to pass the time as best they can. None have been allowed to cross the bridge since Niger's military takeover.
Here we are. We don't have enough fuel to turn back like some others. We can only pray that they'll open up and let us through.
If we get sick here, there's no one to take care of us. We plead with the authorities to make an effort and open the border. Let us through, please.
Economic sanctions imposed by ECOWAS on Niger following July's coup are already weighing heavily on the economy. Prices have risen by more than 20% in the landlocked country, which imports a majority of its goods. And for truck drivers, many of whom were taken by surprise by the border closures, it's their entire livelihood that's under threat. Some have turned to informal ferries to cross the river, a risky proposition, especially for those trying to transport merchandise.
Those who are transporting rice, it's all wet. The cassava flour is all wet. Everything got spoiled.
And with negotiations between ECOWAS and Niger's military government seemingly at a standstill, these truck drivers will have to wait a while longer for the sanctions to be lifted.
Today marks the 10th anniversary of the deadly attack on a shopping mall in Kenya. 67 people were killed and more than 200 wounded after gunmen from al-Shabaab jihadist group stormed the Westgate Mall, spraying bullets and hurling grenades at terrified shoppers. Bastien Renault takes a look back.
On Saturday, the 21st of September 2013, 4 members of al-Shabaab stormed the Westgate shopping mall at around noon. They killed 62 civilians, 5 members of the security forces, and injured many more people. The siege ended 4 days later when the 4 men were killed by the Kenyan military. This attack exposed the poor cooperation of interagency security teams in response to terrorist attack. 10 years on, Kenya has improved its security policies to be more efficient in its fight against terrorism. Listen to this expert.
After this attack, Kenya engaged in a number of reforms of its security sector, and that led to 2 major improvements. I mean, first of all, the direct response to terror attacks was much better, and we saw that in 2019 in response to the so-called Do-Sit attack, where the response was much more efficient and leading to a much lower toll. And second, over the years, Kenya's security forces and more specifically counter-terrorism services have been credited with the prevention of a number of attacks on Kenya's territory.
Kenya has developed its internal security policies, but its fight against al-Shabaab is not over yet. The terrorist organization is still present in Somalia. It's still controlling a large part of the south of the country bordering Kenya. So the Kenyan military is still fighting them at the border. It's still part of the African Union mission in Somalia. And it's also collaborating with the United States Army, notably by hosting an American military airbase at the border with Somalia. In Ghana, 30% of food production are destroyed by pests and diseases.
A situation that threatens food security on the continent. In Ghana, a team of engineers might have found a solution using artificial intelligence. Our correspondent Tutsis went to have a look.
Theophilus Edujemfi lost more than half of his maize farm when Ghana faced a major invasion of fall armyworm pests 5 years ago.
They eat the floral part of the maize even before they get to the maturity stage. So the plant wouldn't be able to give the maximum crop because the crop is what you get the yield from. So most of the plant will go usually, but the yield that you expect from the crop, as bigger as my hand, you will not get it.
Darlington Akogo and his team of engineers went across the country to find out from farmers about how to identify pests even before they developed into bigger threats to crop yields. The innovation gives the GPS coordinate of where the pests are so farmers can cut the hours spent manually in looking for diseases on farms.
You want to be able to use technology to understand each plant, understand what they want, and then provide it for them. So that's where, the drones and AI system come in. We can tell each plant, is it diseased or not, and then you respond to it accordingly. Let's see what the AI system has discovered. But these two trees clearly have serious...
Artificial intelligence seems to be cutting down the workload for farmers, and yet, in many parts of Africa, its use on farms remains low. At the University of Ghana, crop scientists have been working for years to understand how to maximize agricultural yields and developing new plant breeds that would withstand diseases. Rita Akweli Ajay is a lead researcher here.
On average, it takes you between 8 to 10 years to be able to develop one variety that you can call well-developed and ready to be sent out to the market. But artificial intelligence helps us to shorten the number of years.
The move from old forms of farming to the use of AI has become even more urgent to sustain food systems in many countries already facing food insecurity.
And thanks for watching Eye on Africa. Stay with us for more news.